My girlfriend failed her college entrance exam. She was in a slump, just wasting away her days, and wanted to go work out of town with her foster brother. I couldn't stand watching her continue to fall apart, so I paid and put in effort to supervise her studies for retaking the exam. Finally, she got into a university, and her future looked bright. But her foster brother got into trouble while working outside and almost beat someone up, ending up in jail. She actually blamed me for it. If it weren't for you, I would have been watching over him, and he wouldn't have gotten into trouble. She resented me for ruining things for her foster brother, and when he got out of prison, they both pushed me off a cliff. When I opened my eyes again, I went back to the year she failed her exam. This time, I let go decisively, wanting to see how she'd find happiness with her manic brother. Paul, come on, is it because I didn't get into college? If you can't stand me like this, we can just break up. My brain snapped out of a sharp pain, and I was totally in a haze. What I heard was Victoria's familiar voice. I suddenly snapped to reality, looking around at the familiar scene. The smoky internet cafe, the messy seats, people looking at Victoria with bad intentions, and Victoria herself, impatiently dismissing me. This was clearly the scene when Victoria slumped after failing her exams. Why aren't you talking? I'll take that as you agreeing. Now get out and stop annoying me. I couldn't believe I pinched myself, and the familiar pain made me realize I had really been reborn. In the past life, after failing her entrance exams, she gave up on herself, spent all day gaming in internet cafes, and picked up smoking and drinking. I thought she was just lost because she didn't do well on her exams. So, I encouraged her to repeat the year, thinking she could get into a good college someday. But Victoria tearfully refused, saying her family favored sons over daughters and wouldn't support her repeating a year. I pitied her situation, lamented her unfair family, and worked my butt off in college, even took out loans to support her studies. In the end, Victoria got into a good university and became a successful professional after graduation. But because I focused so much on part-time jobs, I didn't pay as much attention to my own studies. So my college performance was just average. After graduating, I couldn't achieve as much as she did. But Victoria didn't care about that. We ended up getting married and had a happy family. Feeling unworthy of her, I was overly accommodating after marriage, and entrusted all our family's finances to her. But everything changed when her foster brother Jackson got out of prison. Victoria got busier, and her attitude towards me turned casual. Whenever Jackson needed something, she was crazily busy helping him. At first, I totally supported her attitude and even offered help because he was an important family member to her. But later, I slowly began to notice something off. Her attitude toward Jackson wasn't like a sister, but more like a lover. Whenever I casually asked about it or tried to stop her from immediately helping him, she'd sternly say, "He's my brother. He just got out of prison and is disconnected from society. I should support him." Over time, my questions seemed to annoy her more and more, and she'd even go stay at her foster brother's place sometimes. I asked her to come home, considering her foster brother was older and unmarried, but she'd point at my face, yelling, "A dirty-minded person sees filth everywhere. We have a pure relationship, a normal sibling bond." But which siblings would hug and kiss, hold hands, and even go to bed together? When I found out about their dirty little secret, I was shocked to the core. I immediately asked Victoria for a divorce. She was smart, realizing during our talk that I had found out about her improper relationship with her foster brother. She pleaded with me not to divorce, swore it was just an accident. We'd been together for so many years, and she couldn't let go of me. She promised we'd go back to living well like before. Looking at her, the love I'd cherished for over 10 years, I agreed to her request out of reluctance. After that, Victoria cut off contact with her foster brother publicly but continued secretly seeing him. But since they didn't meet in person, I turned a blind eye. It wasn't until she tricked me into going to the top of a mountain pretending it was for a trip that she pushed me down. Only then did I realize how much she hated me. Rescue teams took 2 whole days to find my mangled body at the bottom of the mountain, and Victoria announced that I had slipped and fallen by accident. At my funeral, she cried her eyes out, fainting a few times from grief. But once everyone left, she openly cuddled with her foster brother in front of my portrait, clearly in love. That's when I realized it was all a plan to take my assets and run away together. Coming back to my senses, looking at the still young Victoria in front of me, I couldn't help but snicker inside. With her usual grades, how could she have done so poorly on the exams? Last life, her excuse was that her family favored her brothers, messing up her study focus, which is why she failed. Back then, I felt so sorry for her, and it made me even more determined to help her repeat a year. But now I know that she deliberately did badly. Because Jackson didn't have good grades, their family sent him out to work right after the exams. Victoria wanted to follow him and came up with this plan. Her excuses were just things she said to outsiders. Sadly, in my past life, I didn't see through her, and instead got her family to supervise her studies. Now thinking back, she must have blamed me back then for ruining her plans and destroying her happiness. This time around, I won't repeat the same mistakes. So I spoke directly to Victoria, who was casually gaming. In that case, let's just break up. Victoria casually responded okay, but then realized what I said. She instantly took off her headphones, turning her head to look at me in disbelief. She seemed to not understand why the boyfriend who usually spoiled her wasn't comforting her and instead was breaking up. I calmly smiled at her, repeating, "Since that's what you want, then let's break up." Victoria was taken aback for 2 seconds after hearing my words. Then she turned her head and snapped, "Since you agreed, what are you still standing here for? Remember, I dumped you first." Hearing the obvious annoyance in her voice, I didn't try to pacify her like usual. Instead, I simply turned and left, letting her have fun at the internet cafe on her own. This time around, I respected her wishes. I was curious to see what kind of happiness she and her foster brother would eventually find. Half a month later, at the graduation dinner organized by our class, Victoria was nowhere in sight. Her close friend mentioned that Victoria had already left to work with her family. Hearing this shocked the class. They whispered among themselves about Victoria, occasionally glancing at me, eager to see my reaction to the news. I chimed in at the right moment. "Actually, I have no idea what she's up to now. After the exam results came out, she just broke up with me straight away." I did try to persuade her to repeat the year since her grades are usually great. But she told me her family wouldn't let her because they value sons over daughters. I felt bad for her but had no choice but to respect her decision. I sighed, feigning sadness over the breakup. But the other classmates, especially those close to Victoria, started having odd expressions. I knew why they reacted that way. Anyone familiar with Victoria's family was aware that not only did her family treat sons and daughters equally, they actually favored her as a daughter. I had transferred in halfway through senior year, so I believed all the stories Victoria told me in the past about her family. A female classmate couldn't hold back any longer and curiously asked, "Paul, did you get something wrong?" Victoria's family never had a preference for sons over daughters. The rest of the class, including the teacher, nodded in agreement. Feigning surprise, I replied, "No way. Victoria often told me her family favored sons over daughters. She wouldn't lie to me about something like that." The girl awkwardly laughed and said, "Maybe we just don't know her well enough." The conversation made things a bit awkward, so everyone smiled and changed the topic. The dinner atmosphere quickly became lively again. But noticing the glances and typing hands around me, it was clear that everyone had figured out what was going on. This town wasn't big, and gossip spread fast. Within a day, news that Victoria claimed her family favored sons over daughters reached everyone. People started gossiping about her parents. Unable to bear the rumors, Victoria's parents scolded her and began explaining the situation. But with gossip, the more you explain, the murkier it gets. Within days, Victoria was calling me in outrage. "Paul, what do you mean by spreading that? How could you say those things about me?" She yelled as soon as I picked up. Calmly, I replied, "What did I say? I only spoke the truth. Or are you saying you weren't honest with me before?" Of course, she couldn't admit she had been deceitful, so she stammered, "How could I deceive you? You just misunderstood." She then boldly added, "Paul, we broke up." Proper ex is supposed to act like they're dead. I don't want to hear anything about my family from you ever again. Let's just be strangers. Victoria thought I agreed to break up only out of anger and that today I'd comfort her and beg to get back together. Plainly, she wanted her foster brother's happiness but also my money for support, ensuring she doesn't suffer outside. Ultimately, she only ever loved herself. In the past life, I didn't realize and played the fool, ruining my own life. This time, I wasn't going to play along. I chuckled coldly, Victoria. You're giving yourself too much credit. Since we broke up, I haven't once reached out to you. You're the one assuming too much, and we have nothing to do with each other now. Then I hung up. The clouds from my past life's grievances lifted a bit from within me. Just when I thought Victoria and I were done for good, half a month later she called again. This time I didn't hesitate to hang up, blocking her number. Yet Victoria was persistent, calling from different numbers. When I inadvertently answered, her voice was bratty. Paul, what's the deal? Why can't I use the family card? It's so embarrassing trying to check out without money while shopping. Laughing at her audacity, I boldly replied, Victoria, we're broken up. Of course, I won't let you use the family card. If you had any shame, you wouldn't even be asking. Victoria, maybe hit where it hurts? Loudly protested, your family's loaded. What's the harm in spending a bit on me? We were once a couple. Isn't spending money on me the least you could do? Her shamelessness astonished me again. Miss, we're strangers now. Besides, money doesn't grow on trees. Why should I spend on you? Aren't you working now with Jackson? Isn't his money enough? Victoria was stumped for a moment. I didn't want to drag on the conversation, so I gave her a final warning. If you keep this up, I'll sue you for harassment. Sensing my seriousness, she finally hung up. I really don't have the time to deal with her drama. College is starting soon, and I'm so excited. This time, I didn't apply to the universities near City A. I chose a medical school. In my past life, I gave up the school and major I liked to look after Victoria while she repeated a year, just because she said she needed me around to feel safe. This time, I finally get to study what I truly love. Med student life is dull and tedious, with piles of books and endless things to memorize. My schedule is packed every day. I barely have time to think about Victoria. But just as my life was peacefully moving along, Victoria called again. This time, she was calling for help. The call was quick. She barely gave me a chance to speak. She sounded helpless, crying and begging me to save her. Then I heard the phone drop and her pained cries as she was being beat up. The beating didn't last long. A few minutes later, Victoria's voice came through again. This time, her tone was missing its usual pride and arrogance, leaving only helpless sobs. She told me where she was and asked for help. Seeing her like this, mixed emotions stirred within me. Even though there were grudges between us, I couldn't just watch her get beaten to death. So I called the police. It's best to leave such matters to them. But a few days later, Victoria showed up at my school's gate. At first, I didn't know she was there. She was asking students if they knew me or where to find me. When asked who she was to me or what she wanted, she dodged and wouldn't answer. Rumors spread, and the way people looked at me started changing. A few days later, as I was heading to school, Victoria tried to rush over and hug me as soon as she saw me, but I sidestepped her. She fell to the ground, pathetically crying, "Paul, please help my brother." Looking at the crowd of onlookers, I bluntly stated the facts. You were the one who got beaten by Jackson. You called me crying for help and gave me your location. That's why I called the police. So now, are you saying I caused trouble for your brother? Honestly, this twisting of facts is something I dealt with all too much in my past life. Back then, she cheated first, yet in front of others, she acted all virtuous, occasionally showing a pitiful demeanor, and hinted at things. This led everyone to think I was the neglectful husband. They all came to criticize me. Later, when the police came to mediate, the neighbors took Victoria's side, and we never got divorced. This time, I pointed out her lies right away. She won't have a chance to slander me. Victoria was visibly upset and said, "I just wanted you to come over or give me some money. I didn't mean for my brother to end up in the police station." You did it on purpose, didn't you? You just don't want to see me with Jackson. What she said is strange. I didn't even know about her and her foster brother this time. Why is she saying this now? Could she have been reborn too? At the thought, I felt a wave of nausea, but I couldn't show it in front of her. Instead, I firmly said we're just regular classmates. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to help directly. People might misunderstand. It's better to get the police involved. They're faster and can guarantee your safety. Plus, I'm still a student and have my studies to focus on. By the way, why didn't you tell your family about this? Why come to a high school classmate you're barely familiar with? As I explained, sympathetic glances started coming my way. Clearly, they realized what was going on. Seeing her plan fail, Victoria blurted, "No, it's not like that. You wouldn't act this way in our past life. Something must be wrong here." Hearing that, I was sure she'd been reborn too, just at a later point. But clearly, she regrets it now. I chuckled and said, "I feel sorry for you, but maybe you got shaken up too much from being beaten. How else could you say something about a past life? Anyway, I've already contacted your family through our old teacher. They'll come to take you home tomorrow. You can rest easy now." Victoria, unwilling to give up, wanted to say more but saw the way people were looking at her. She stayed silent, reluctantly turned, and left. Before she left, she shot me a furious glare. As she departed, the crowd dispersed by itself. Honestly, I'm not surprised Victoria got beat up. After all, her stepbrother Jackson has bipolar disorder and is usually pretty temperamental. Once he starts, he'll hit anyone, and no one can stop him. In the past, he ended up in jail after getting into a fight during an episode, nearly beating someone to death. When he got out, his condition didn't improve. In fact, whenever he got upset, he'd go on a rampage at our house. Victoria let it slide, but I was the one paying for the damaged furniture and walls. Eventually, I suggested getting him some treatment, but Victoria refused and blamed me, saying Jackson wasn't a bad person, just had a bad temper. Now, Victoria's getting a first-hand taste of Jackson's temper herself. But I didn't expect someone would record what happened and post it online. Now it's blowing up all over the internet. Victoria is stirring things up again. She posted some videos of herself getting beaten and swayed public opinion to her side, making herself look all innocent and pitiful. Our past issues also got dug up, with a lot of people online calling me a jerk. Some are even trying to track down Jackson to cyberbully him. But Jackson wasn't one to care. He came out and openly claimed that Victoria was the one who seduced him. He even showed their previous chat logs as proof. Suddenly, the two of them were fighting for all to see, and the onlookers were thoroughly entertained. At that point, I decided to release the police report and the past chat logs where Victoria had lied to me. I didn't want to get involved in their mess, but someone was trying to dig up dirt on my family. I couldn't let this drag my family into it. I never wanted anything to do with Victoria again. With all the evidence out there, Victoria had no way to deny it. Her reputation was now completely ruined. Victoria's parents approached Jackson to talk things over and reportedly gave him a lot of benefits to calm down. Later, for some reason, Victoria reached out to Jackson to reconcile. It wasn't until I saw Victoria live streaming and selling products that I realized that any publicity, good or bad, could be useful. She was trying to make big bucks off her newfound fame. But the audience isn't stupid. Victoria was popular for a while but then faded into obscurity. None of this mattered to me anymore. I was surprised when, during the Chinese New Year, she showed up with Jackson to show off. Looking at Victoria, who was thin, old-looking yet dressed glamorously, I couldn't believe she was only 20. It was less than 6 months since the scandal broke out, yet she seemed to have aged dramatically. Still, she didn't care. She just kept bragging about her gold bracelets and rings in front of me. She mocked me, saying that studying medicine was useless, and I couldn't make big money, not even as much as her brother. Looking at the dazed Jackson beside her, I sensed something was wrong. Jackson's eyes were vacant, and at one point during a meal, he started sweating and shaking. Victoria quickly pulled out white pills from a bottle and gave them to him. Only then did his symptoms ease. Afterwards, Victoria told us it was medication for Jackson's bipolar disorder. Our relatives didn't understand these things, but considering Jackson's previous bad temper, they accepted her explanation. But watching all this, I felt a chill in my heart. My fears were becoming more certain. Victoria and Jackson might be involved with something they shouldn't be, possibly even using it for profit. But I couldn't really be sure. I suggested in front of everyone that if they needed help, I could assist with Jackson's psychological counseling, given I had taken psychology courses. Victoria, upon hearing this, became defensive and cautiously turned the offer down with a smile. After that, Victoria kept a close eye on Jackson, leaving me no opportunity to approach him. However, the more guarded they were, the more convinced I became of my suspicions. Then, one day, Victoria and Jackson left in a hurry, claiming they had unfinished work. I noticed their strange behavior and decided to call the police, hoping I was wrong. Within a day, the police informed me that my suspicions were correct, but Victoria had managed to escape. They caught Jackson, who confessed everything. I didn't pay much attention to Jackson's fate after that, but Victoria was nowhere to be found. Time moved on, gently erasing the past. I focused on my studies and graduated successfully. In my first year of work, I met a woman whose habits reminded me a lot of Victoria. Her name was Lily. We met at the hospital where I was interning. Her friend was diagnosed with AIDS, and Lily accompanied them for treatment. My mentor happened to specialize in this field, so we got to know each other over time. The more I interacted with her, the more uneasy I felt. Sure, looks and body shapes can change, but small details in speech and behavior are hard to alter. As I spent more time with Lily, I started to see patterns that matched Victoria's. So I started testing her. For example, Victoria was severely allergic to peanuts and would go into shock. I deliberately took Lily to eat peanut sweets, but nothing happened. Other tests showed her reacting differently than Victoria. I began to think I was just paranoid. On the other hand, Lily and I had a lot in common. We grew closer, and our relationship became more intimate. Just when I was about to put the connection between Lily and Victoria behind me, it happened. While at the zoo, Lily reacted to snakes just like Victoria did. Instinctive reactions don't lie. I was sure Lily was Victoria, though I wasn't sure how she fooled the earlier tests. But that reaction was unmistakable. I had known Victoria for years, and her behaviors were familiar to me. Looking back, my tests were crude and obvious. If she had prepared for them, I wouldn't have found anything. I sought help from the police again, but they couldn't act without proof. I had to be careful, as Victoria could ruin my career if she found out. I wasn't going to let that happen. That's when I thought of an infallible proof: fingerprints. Unlike other things, fingerprints never change. So, whenever I was with Lily, I made a point to grab her bag for her. At first, she seemed a bit off about it, but eventually, she got used to it. When I thought the time was right, I took her out for dinner. First, I gave her some dried persimmons, then treated her to a crab feast. You shouldn't mix crab and persimmons. It'll give you a bad case of diarrhea. When she ran to the restroom, I took that chance to grab her fingerprints from her makeup products. With all that done, I saw Lily was already in pain, so I rushed her to the hospital for treatment. Meanwhile, I made up some excuse to leave quickly, popped over to the police station, and handed over her fingerprints for a match. It didn't take long. The police barged into the hospital room in the middle of the night and arrested Victoria. When they caught her, Victoria was in shock. She couldn't put up a fight and just got taken away. I thought that was the end of it. But a few days later, the cops called me. They said Victoria wanted to see me one last time. She wouldn't talk unless she saw me. Since it was a big deal, I met her again in the interrogation room. Or rather, Lily, no, Victoria. Victoria looked at me calmly and asked, "I thought I was so well hidden. How did you figure me out?" I looked at her, feeling mixed emotions, and just said, "I recognized you by intuition." Victoria became furious and shouted, "Why do you always ruin my plans? I bet you feel proud about it. You destroyed my life. It's all your fault. If you just behaved like before, I wouldn't be like this monster now. It's you. You're to blame." She got more and more agitated, trying to reach across the bars to strangle me. But she was tied to the interrogation chair, so it was all in vain. I looked at her and sighed, Victoria, you brought this on yourself. If not for your greed and not knowing right from wrong, you wouldn't be here now. Yet, she seemed deaf to everything. She kept fidgeting and muttering to herself, lost in her own world. The officers monitoring us from the cameras saw it wasn't going anywhere, so they asked me to leave. The rest wasn't for me to handle. As I walked out of the police station and looked at the bright blue sky, I felt overwhelmed with emotion. Victoria and I had been through so much together, but now we both have our own endings. Finally, I can let go and enjoy my own good life.